Greetings. It is Monday, November the 18th, 2024. I'm Thomas Caldwell of the Aurelian Column, and this is the Monday Morning Report. One of the curses of American English is our use of idioms. And sometimes when you're speaking to people whose native language is not English, it can get pretty confusing. Or even if you're a native speaker of some other form of English, and there are many in the world. And I'm going to use a reference of an American idiom, and it's called playing chicken. Now, what is playing chicken? Well, it's a rather stupid game that younger American males tend to play in one form or another, and chicken refers to someone who is cowardly. And one method by which this game can be employed is you have a long, straight road, and on either end is some rather foolish young person behind the wheel, and at the given signal, they both accelerate at full speed towards each other. The object of the game, if you can call it that, is for one person to stop or veer off before a head-on collision occurs. Now, there are no official statistics as to where this is played, how it's played, or what the fatality rate is. But let's just say it's more than zero. Playing chicken could be a very good description of what the Biden administration is now doing with the Russian Federation, what Mr. Biden is doing with Mr. Putin. Over the last day, it's come out that the Biden administration, reversing its long-held position, has authorized the Ukrainian former president comedian to utilize American long-range missiles to hit targets in Russia. Earlier this year, Vladimir Putin, the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces, said that any such attack on his territory by American weapons would result in a war with the United States and NATO. Now, something to point out, these weapons are not being handled 100% by Ukrainians, almost certainly. There's Americans involved. Why would Mr. Biden do this? Now, the man had to drop out of the American presidential election because he's, let's put it politely, a senile old fool. Yet he is now making this policy, or the people around him are making this policy, that could result in a direct conflict between the United States and the Russian Federation, that could go nuclear. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for anybody. This is bad. This is real bad. And in reading various news reports today, there are some that are not putting any comment on it. There are some that are trying to put a positive spin on it, which didn't really work very well. Oh, he's trying to bring the Russians to the negotiating table. It's a foregone conclusion that the Ukrainians, who are basically corrupt criminals, the people running Ukraine are corrupt criminals, folks. Sorry, that's just a fact of nature. Kind of like the sky being blue. They're going to use these things. And when that happens, everything is up in the air as to where it can go. I was born a few months before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and in my lifetime, this is probably the closest we've ever come to a real World War III. People are throwing that around this morning in various news locations, World War III. They're not exaggerating. This is bad. Why they're doing this, playing chicken, I've had several people ask me that this morning, and I said, I can't get into the mind of a child molester. I can't get into the mind behind this. There's no reason to do it. There's none. There was no reason to back Ukraine in this whole thing. The U.S. should have been trying to stop this war as opposed to promote it. The Europeans seem to be realizing exactly how bad this has gotten. We're supposed to hear later today from Vladimir Putin. That's some of the things I've been reading, although it's a little unclear as to how that'll go. The Biden administration is playing chicken only a few months before they're about to leave office. Why anyone voted for the Democrats in this past year is beyond me. Because those of us who've been following this and actually taking the time to learn what's going on couldn't believe how ignorant our fellow countrymen were, saying, "Oh yes, Kamala Harris and Biden, yeah, they're good." No, you guys just are not that bright. Now, I am not a big Trump fan. I completely admit that. He's the best that we have at the moment. At least he wants to put the country first, and we'll go into more why that's needed in a little bit. The danger is quite real. The danger is quite real. These missiles that the Americans have installed in Ukraine have the range of a few hundred miles. I've seen different explanations, and I'm sure their true capacity is somewhat secret. But if Moscow or St. Petersburg or some major city is hit by one of these things, what do you think the Russians are going to do? Back down? If a few thousand people are killed? A few thousand people were killed on 9/11, and the U.S. went to war for 2 decades over that. They've been giving warnings to us a lot about what they're going to do. The Ukrainians do have the capability of making what's called a dirty bomb, which would be spreading radioactive material. Whether they would be that insane, I don't know, but the insanity level keeps getting hopped up in this whole conflict. It's hard to tell where it's going to stop. I don't know what to do about this, frankly. I would recommend people call the White House hotline and let their views be known. I don't think that's going to matter too much. I don't think they care about what the average American thinks or how much they suffer or how their daily lives go. I don't think most members of Congress care either. You can try. There's a feeling of helplessness among some of us who watch this, and I'm beginning to feel that right now. All we can do is hope, wait, watch, and pray. But if it makes you feel better, go to house.gov or senate.gov, find the contact information for your various members of our legislative branch, and let them know that the insanity's got to stop. Because the Biden administration seems hell-bent on World War III, and they don't really have much to lose, do they? I mean, they got a lot of money stashed away in a lot of nice homes. You'd think they'd want to just leave the U.S. government after pilfering everything and live in peace. But if you can't get into the mind of a child molester, you're not going to be able to get into the mind of what's going on right now. Now, speaking of the legislative branch of the United States government, a rather interesting thing occurred this past week, which has been somewhat ignored by the mainstream media, but everything's ignored by the mainstream media that's worth it. And this is the words on the House floor by a congressman from North Carolina named Wiley Nickel. He openly outlined a plan for a shadow cabinet, effectively a shadow executive branch of government. In other words, nothing that the Trump administration was going to do was going to have any effect. Congress was going to set up its own executive branch. Wow. Forget about unconstitutional. That's sedition. That's real sedition, not the nonsense about January 6th. That's real sedition. And I was watching this, and then I checked the constitutional and U.S. legal definition of sedition, and I said, yeah, this guy is out there basically inciting one branch of the government to rebel against the other and outlining how they want to do it. You see, a very uncomfortable truth, not just about the Democrats, but about the Republicans, is that most of them have a vested interest in what's going on, namely the corruption, the kickbacks, the donations. People come into Congress and are paid, what, about $150,000 a year, maybe with benefits and everything? Let's just round it up to $250,000. And Washington's a pretty expensive place to live. Take it from someone who knows. And they're walking away years later as millionaires, many dozens of times over in some cases. The corruption is so deeply rooted that the Trump people coming in, of course they're going to be resisted. They're not going to be resisted. They're going to try to stop them. Because if you really do follow the money, it's going to lead to some pretty interesting places and more than likely some very interesting foreign bank accounts. This is how bad things have gotten. They talk about it being a swamp, and it's not. A swamp is a natural living organism in the natural world. It's a beautiful place in some ways. This is a toxic waste dump. But this just shows exactly how nuts things have gotten at the higher levels of the U.S. federal government. There's no other way to put it. Anyone who's a journalist, anyone who's a reporter has to admit this, not just to themselves, but to the people they report to. This is how bad it's gotten. One example is the report that just came out. The Pentagon, the Department of Defense, cannot account for $824 billion. $824 billion. The average person can't even imagine that amount of money. They can't even imagine 1% of that amount of money, or a fraction of a percent of that amount of money. And it's gone missing. They can't say where it went to. That $824 billion went someplace. There's got to be a paper trail of it somewhere. So when you see members of Congress resisting and talking about how terrible these people coming into government are that want to clean things up, you can see what's going on. I mean, it's pretty obvious. One of the books I reviewed not too long ago, and I would urge you to go back and check the previous work on Substack I've done. One of the book reports was called The Big Guy, how Biden basically and his family raided the United States. They not only took the cookies out of the jar, they took the cookie jar too. That book will make your blood boil. This is what these people are. They are the Biden crime family, but there's a lot more crime families than just them in the congressional realm. You're talking trillions of dollars. If it's $824 billion from the Pentagon alone, it's way up in the trillions that have gone missing. Where did that money go? That's our money. Or I should say China's that we borrowed and have to pay back. Again, why did anyone vote for this in the previous election? Why? Really? So, Mr. Nickel, you've demonstrated sedition. It'll be interesting if you're charged with that. But if Congress goes through with coming up with its own executive branch of government, when you see these people stand up and openly defy the Constitution they are sworn to uphold, it shows how bad things have gotten. The average person in Congress, if you have a chance to meet them, they're not that smart. They're ambitious, they're clever, they're not that smart. Some of them are. Most of them aren't. I think we have to do what some republics in earlier history did, and that would be in Rome, I believe, during the time of the Republic, that senators had to limit their income. It was limited to farm production, actually. You had to be a landowner to be in the Senate, and you had to raise your funds through growing food or something productive like that. You couldn't be a merchant and be in the Senate, at least in the early years. Maybe members of our Congress have to take an oath of poverty. That would really clean things up, wouldn't it? The money is now so tied to everything, including war, that I'm just hoping that we're going to get out of this, because if a war starts with Russia, even if it's not nuclear, it's going to be a horror. Some people will make money out of it, or at least they think so. There were a lot of people in Japan and Germany in World War II who were making a lot of money, at least for a while, and then they stopped. Were stopped. Now, there's another part of the world that I'm going to address this morning, and this is one where someone contacted me and said, you sound like you're pro-Iranian, that you're all for the Islamic fundamentalist movement and all this other rather crazy stuff. No, I'm not. I am not a friend of the current Iranian regime, but I am a friend of Iranians. I'm a big fan of Persians and Persian culture, and over the years I've had friends from that part of the world, I'm very honored to say. But I thought it would be appropriate to go into the history of that country. Very few Americans really understand that I was a young man when the Iranian Revolution occurred, which led to all of the Islamic fundamentalism that we're seeing now. That did not really exist on a large scale prior to 1979, when the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah of Iran. Very few Americans know much about that. I'm amazed to discover the Iranian hostage crisis that was brought on by Jimmy Carter, who, in my view, was the worst president in American history. I have that view, and he's now more than 100 years old and watching what's going on. I hope he realizes what he set in motion. That whole time in history, I would urge people to research. There are some documentaries done at the time I was able to dig up, very well put together. And I've sent them off to some people, and they are shocked. Yeah, the Shah and his father, who took over in the early part of the 20th century, they were what we would call positively progressive. They took a backward medieval country and dragged it, in some cases, kicking and screaming, into the modern world. They were one of the most powerful militaries, but you know what? They had a literacy corps. They had a branch of their military back in the 50s, 60s, 70s that was dedicated to going out to villages and teaching people to read and write. Imagine that. They had a growing industrial base. They were able to educate their people. Women were treated far better. They had engineers, scientists. Did you know back then Iran made its own automobiles? They were on their way to being what was going to be called the Japan of the Middle East. It was projected that into the 1980s at some point they would become the 5th largest economy on earth. They did have rudimentary freedom of speech. The Shah did exert a strong hand. He wasn't perfect, but he put his country first. He took care of his people. And for a whole combination of reasons, namely the American left literally saying that Ayatollah Khomeini was a holy man, a saint, and he was going to stop all of the corruption. There were some, of course, I'm sure, or stop some of the abuses. Well, the Shah was pretty ruthless with some of his enemies. He was merciful with Ayatollah Khomeini. You know, he was actually at one point arrested and they were going to put him to death. I believe that was in the 1960s, but the Shah decided to let him go into exile. He said, no, I don't want a martyr. You know, that was a mistake. They should have just shot the guy. That's another thing. That's the ghost of Julius Caesar. Do not show mercy to your enemies. They will come back and kill you. That's another lesson that the incoming Trump administration, I hope, knows and does not let up. No one's talking about taking people out and shooting them, but prosecuting people that need to be prosecuted, yes. But I would recommend people go back and really research the Iran of the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s. They had a multitude of religions there, even Jews. They were very tolerant of all sorts of things. They were dedicated to helping people. The Shah reformed land. He gave back a lot of land from these ancient landlords. They didn't get a lot of foreign aid. You know, they built a national railroad in the early 20th century. His father did, by taxing sugar, and they paid for it themselves. And at that time, the Middle East, compared to now, was a pretty peaceful place. Islamic fundamentalism effectively didn't exist. It started when Jimmy Carter abandoned Iran, and, well, history has played out the way it's played out. Did you know that once they were our ally? I mean, we had American soldiers based in Iran, about 50,000 at one time. These are things that people don't get taught anymore. But this is the stuff you can throw away if you're stupid. The Democrats have not really had a good president since John F. Kennedy. That was a long time ago. So, that being said, it's important at this point to really educate yourselves. Not just on this insanity that the Biden administration has introduced in the last 24 hours and could escalate into some very unpleasant places. And if you're frightened, good. You should be. You know, the U.S., one story that came across my desk this morning is that the U.S. Is now funding a commuter rail system in Lima, Peru. That was interesting to learn. Yeah, the U.S. government is paying for a commuter rail system in the city of Lima, Peru. I recently took Amtrak to some Middle America location. It was a fascinating trip, but the trains were old, rickety. During the trip, one broke down. One I was on broke down for like an hour and a half. It was... Yeah, we have a lot of infrastructure problems in this country, but we're trying to build up other countries. This is globalism, folks. This is globalism. No sane country in the history of the world would put its resources into building up other countries before building up their own. And this is what Trump is all about. Again, he's not leading this stuff. He's being pushed along by it. More and more Americans are probably waking up. More and more Americans who voted for Kamala Harris are beginning to wake up, I've noticed. They've thought, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. I voted for her. Glad it didn't count. Unless you put yourself first, you're going to probably lose everything. That's why if you're on an airplane that's diving into the dirt, the first thing you do is put the oxygen mask on yourself before you help anyone else. The same rule goes for countries that are heading into the dirt. May we pull out of the dive before it's too late. Well, that's it for today, for this morning. If you appreciate my work, please like and subscribe. Please consider a paid subscription, and I also do have a fundraiser for needed video equipment and a new computer. That's up on the Substack channel if you want to help out there. I do welcome feedback and ideas and suggestions and just good old-fashioned correspondence. You can reach me at feedback@aureliancolumn.com. That's feedback@aureliancolumn.com. I'm up on X. My ID there is MICCAMPEN. That's MICCAMPEN. I'm up on a few other platforms. You can find the Aurelian Column up on Telegram. I'm up personally on Gab and Minds. I'm not up on Facebook. There are a few other places I'll start to appear soon. This podcast does originate on Substack. My address there is aureliancolumn.substack.com. You can also send me text messages there. Until we meet again, until my next report, be good, be safe, be vigilant, and remember, Clown World and the deep state must be destroyed. Good day.